Hi, I'm Dr. Sylvia Peregrino, and this is your show, Entre Nosotras, Latina Voices. Today, I'm honored to have the City Administrator from San Elizario, Ms. Maya Sanchez. Ms. Maya Sanchez, welcome.
Thank you. I'm so happy to be here.
So tell us a little bit about your background and what you do for the city.
Okay. Well, I'm originally from El Paso. I was born here and in Segundo Barrio, actually. But when I was 2, my family moved to California. And so in 2010, after being gone 30 plus years, I decided to come back for good. And so I came here really to take over my family business, and we have some farmland out in San Elizario, and I really wanted to grow upon that business. But in the process of doing that, we were faced with what ended up becoming the incorporation of San Elizario. And this happened, we found out about it in December of 2012, and we started our efforts to incorporate in 2013.
Usually, our audience might not know what incorporation means. So could you talk a little bit about that and why the people of San Elizario decided to incorporate?
Okay. Well, prior to November 5th of 2013, San Elizario was just considered part of El Paso County. There was no city government. We were not a city. Although we obviously have a lot of historic roots in the area, San Elizario was indeed the first county seat of El Paso in 1850. At this moment in time, when this happened, we were just unincorporated El Paso County. However, there was a city, the city of Socorro, who was looking to annex. And all these terms I had to learn because I had no idea what they meant. I didn't go to school in Texas, and even if you did through history, Texas history, I don't think you'd understand truly or be given what incorporation, what annexation means, all of that. But Texas law allows for cities that don't have any other cities around them to annex unincorporated areas to grow their cities. And you're allowed as a city to take 10% of your what's called extraterritorial jurisdiction. So that's the area just outside your city limit that you can bring into your city. And that ETJ is based on population. So at the time, the city of Socorro had roughly a little bit more than 30,000 residents. So Socorro's ETJ was 2.5 miles past their city limits, which, if you look at it on our map today, put it past the San Elizario Presidio Chapel. So if allowed to continue to annex, there would be no San Elizario as we know it. It could eventually have become all of Socorro. Now, of course, we don't know what their intentions were, how much they were going to annex, but we knew that they were trying to take some pretty significant businesses like Licon Dairy. If the annexation would have been successful, today Licon Dairy wouldn't be in San Elizario, it would be in Socorro. And so we, as community members, we wanted to find out, is there anything we can do to stop this? Because another thing that's curious about this process is Socorro didn't need our vote to decide whether we wanted to become part of Socorro or not. They could just do it regardless. And so in reaching out to our elected officials, both our county commissioner at the time, Vince Perez, our state rep, Mary Gonzalez, they all started helping us find out what we could do to save San Elizario from annexation. And we quickly found out the only thing you could do is to become a city. But another interesting point is, in order for us to become a city, because we were in Socorro's ETJ, we needed their permission to do so.
How was that process? Like if somebody's watching from another unincorporated area, I do cover it in my class. Usually they're considered CDP, census designated places. And so they, for example, Fabens is a community that is just part of the county and doesn't really have its own government. So like, let's say if theoretically they wanted to do that, they would need permission from El Paso or from whoever's closest?
Whomever's ETJ in which they reside, if they do reside in an ETJ. So again, an ETJ is just a certain mileage outside of a city limit based on population. So not all of El Paso County communities that aren't currently cities lie within an ETJ. Now this one was interesting because they hadn't annexed in 3 years. So in this 1 year, Texas law allows for 10% of your ETJ each year. So since they hadn't annexed in 3 years, they were looking to take 30% of their ETJ. However, it wasn't one full swath of land. They had broken it up, if I remember correctly, into 7 parcels of land. So some of it was going to affect us in San Elizario, some of it affected the town of Horizon City, and still some affected the city of El Paso. So initially, there were a lot of other communities and the cities that were not in favor of this annexation. And so once we were successful in 2013, I started actually getting a lot of phone calls. Well, I would say a handful of phone calls, both here locally for communities that were interested in incorporating to find out what we did to be successful, but even communities as far as the areas in San Antonio who wanted to find out. I guess it made enough news that they were like, oh, they did it successfully, let's see what they did, you know. So really, we needed guidance, and between our elected officials, which was a very, very controversial thing for them to do, because them stepping up for our community meant they were going against their constituency in the city of Socorro. So we were extremely grateful that our elected officials, at the very least, provided us facts and information to find out what we could do to save our city. In addition, through our state rep's office, we were introduced to a municipal attorney who helped guide the process of incorporating. So a lot of what we didn't know, which was pretty much everything, was we learned through the help of the municipal attorney who helped guide the incorporation.
So what did that process entail? Did you have to get a certain number of signatures and talk to neighbors?
No signatures whatsoever. I'm sorry, yes, it did require signatures. I believe, I'm not going to remember the exact amount. I think it might have been around the lines of 1,200 signatures. But really, again, so what we needed to do, and our situation was complicated by some, at the time, alleged illegal activity. So again, like I said, we found out in December of 2012 that this annexation attempt was happening. In January, we started trying to figure out what we could do. The county of El Paso actually sued the city of Socorro because the claim at the time was that 3 elected officials had illegally extended their terms in office. So as the county built this case, which was determined, if I remember correctly, this was a while ago, March 26th of 2013, we went to the courthouse to hear the judgment. If the judge ruled that they had extended their terms illegally, they had to start the annexation process all over again. So by that point, if they were in office legally, pretty much the very next day, March 27th, we were part of Socorro. Well, the judge ruled against the city of Socorro and deemed them in office illegally. So that gave us a very small window to figure out how to get people in office at the next Socorro City Council election that would be favorable to our request. So not only that year were we working to create a city, we were also heavily campaigning on behalf of 3 candidates that would be potentially voted into office in May of 2013 that would allow the release of the ETJ and for us to incorporate. While at the same time, there were other members in council who were starting the annexation process all over again. The May election comes, and so I, as just a community member, was doing all the work, meeting with engineers to determine city limits, all of that work to incorporate, but at the same time, I was also spending my weekends phone banking and block walking in Socorro to try to get these candidates in office. And so it was just nonstop, night and day. And so finally at that May election, the candidates that we supported who were supporting us did indeed get voted into office. And if I'm not mistaken, one of their first actions at the very first city council meeting after they were sworn in, they released the ETJ.
So that's great. And I think a lot of people that maybe don't live in the Socorro, San Elizario area don't know this story. So that's wonderful that you're, giving us a little bit of historical background, because, I think this shows that things don't just happen, that it takes a lot of effort and a lot of mobilization and politics,
right,
to get things to happen. And so why was it important for San Elizario to remain San Elizario?
Well, if you're not from San Elizario and you were raised in El Paso, we would like to think that you would know the historic importance of San Elizario. San Elizario existed before the city of El Paso. We were the first county seat. The county courthouse resided in San Elizario. Many who know the first county jail that ever existed, which is still standing today, is in San Elizario. What eventually became Fort Bliss started in San Elizario. So we really felt that the history was important enough to preserve. But for me personally, I moved out here because I have such a connection to San Elizario through my family, but I also saw the movement that had started with the arts district and people who were just community members pouring back into San Elizario, and I wanted to be a part of that. So not just preservation of the history, but preserving what was to come as a community. And one thing that I have not mentioned yet, but is at the top of this list in terms of importance, is that this whole effort was done by a committed group of community members. We would meet every Monday to strategize. What do we need to do now? What is the work that needs to happen? City engineers are very expensive. So we ended up fundraising. We had different committees that would handle different areas of the incorporation. One was historical research, because initially we weren't sure that we were going to create a new city. We thought San Elizario, since 1851, had gone through so many incorporations and disincorporations. If we could find documented evidence of an incorporation that was never officially disincorporated, we don't have to do all that work. We could just restart an existing incorporation. So we had a research team, of which I sat on, and we were at the county courthouse going through old dusty ledgers that were falling apart to gather all of this information. And this is pretty, it's, you would think it was straight out of a movie, because we had to go through about 7 or 8 handwritten ledgers that had not been digitized yet before we got to the digital microfilm. But in those ledgers, we had gone through all of them, and we found an incorporation that happened in 1911 that through all the years had not been disincorporated. So finally, and I'm not even kidding, on the last page of the last ledger, and this page was falling out of the book, we found a disincorporation. And so knowing that we were dealing with a situation that could potentially be viewed as unethical with the extension of terms, we didn't want to birth our city being unethical. We wanted to make sure that if it's in history, we're abiding by it. So we just decided to scrap the idea of kickstarting an old incorporation and just start from scratch. So I know a lot of communities and cities, one of their biggest challenges is getting people engaged and activated within the community. Well, for this incorporation, we had at least every week about 30 members of the community strong that actively volunteered their time, fundraised. Our city was built on $5 enchilada plates at a time, because that's how we raised our money. was through enchilada fundraisers and other means similar to that.
No, and I think that's wonderful that you're showing how it came from the grassroots, and you wanted to preserve your history as a city. And so usually besides the audience that we have, I make my students watch these. So tell us, what are the advantages of becoming an incorporated city?
Some of the advantages include basically being able to control a lot of things that were previously out of our hand that could be very damaging to communities. So for example, the state of Texas does not allow counties a lot of authority when it comes to regulation of development. And for some people, that's potentially why they move out to the county areas, because they don't have anyone that's telling them what they can't or can't do. However, in San Elizario, it had gotten to a point where you would have, and I'm not making a judgment on whether these are good or bad, but just think about the health situation that you're causing if you have, for example, a diesel truck automotive mechanic right next to a row of houses. The amount of pollution that could start developing, and they have no say whether that can or can't happen within their neighborhoods. So that's just one small example. Again, there are places for diesel mechanic shops and businesses, but it's one of those things that you want to make sure that if you want your kids to be riding their bikes up and down the street, do you want them to have to challenge a big rig driving down that same street at the same time? You know, so we inherited a lot of that unplanned development. And people are doing these things to survive. That is not what we're trying to stop from happening. But you want to make sure that you're doing things in a manner that are safe for your community. So having the authority to create ordinances and rules and regulations that would help steer how the makeup of the community is developed and how the look of the community. And of course, we didn't do this just on our own. We continued that concept of reaching out to the community, having several workshops to eventually develop what became a comprehensive plan that reflected what people in that community want to see for the future of San Elizario. And based on that, that's really the driving force that determines what types of rules do get passed.
You know, years ago when I was a graduate student, some of the areas in the rural areas didn't have water or a lot of infrastructure. Can you talk about, does being a city help you to get more of those infrastructure dollars from the state so you could pave roads or have city lighting?
Yes, definitely. Now, of course, I just kind of said managed development, but under development, obviously, you have the core foundation of infrastructure. And infrastructure can be everything from connection to utilities to improvement of the roads and your highways and access to areas. So that is something that is available to us. Now the city, once we get into the cons, I'll definitely be able to touch on this, but the city, since its inception, has been very small as far as staff is concerned. And so we have had to partner with a lot of other either entities or still working with our elected officials above us to try to see what we can do to even qualify for the grants and get that funding, because you know grant writers also charge, and sometimes the city doesn't have the funds to pay those grant writers, because we definitely don't have the funds to keep a grant writer full-time on staff. So you do qualify, but then you also are faced with the challenge of how do you pay for, because even for cities, it takes money to make money.
You brought up a little bit of the cons. So what have been some of the cons of becoming a city, at least?
I'll be honest, some of our streets are horrendous. we have not had the funding available to improve those streets on our own. Now, one of the things that we allocated early on is money to create a transportation study, because of course we can see with our eyes which are the worst streets, but at the same time, a lot of grants will require you to have a plan in place, not just show them pictures of, look at this ugly street, can you fix this one? And so we allocated funding early on to get a transportation study done, but because there was an area that needs water and sewer, that money got pulled, $50,000 for a study to help address the water and sewage issue. So all these years we haven't had that plan in place that would allow us to qualify for funding outside of what we collect as a city. And I'll get into that because there's a big misconception about people's taxes to pay for these things. But we are now at the point, in fact, just last week, I was able to submit a request to our congressman to get a portion of the appropriations money that would help cover that study. Now, it's not just going to be a study for our city, but the town of Clint, which is even smaller than us, needs the same help. So we joined forces together to request money to get these transportation studies done so we could start addressing these big problem areas, one of the highest complaints that we get about our city streets.
You mentioned the town of Clint. I know that I always cover all the towns because I'm at the Mission campus, so my students come from all around the county and the Lower Valley area. The town of Clint doesn't even have a webpage. And so that's been my, I hope to send them a student intern that's tech savvy, but now I know that they're even smaller in terms of staffing. And so you brought up a lot of interesting points there. And today is actually tax day. And so that, death and taxes, the only two constants in life, right? And so being unincorporated, they weren't paying a city tax, but then now that, that they became a city, now the property owners are paying a city tax. So what are they, what are they getting for that? What's the value added?
Well, the city of San Elizario, when we incorporated, that was one of the biggest complaints that we heard is, well, our taxes are going to go up. And to be honest with you, my grandfather, who participated in an incorporation effort in 1979, of which there was a newspaper clipping that I showed to Commissioner's Court to help, drive home the point that we've been trying to do this for many, many years. That incorporation failed in part because they had an opposition that claimed your taxes are going to be raised. So it was really our effort to really keep the costs, our tax rate low. The first year that we did it, we were either the lowest or the second lowest tax rate in the entire county, and we remained there. Our first tax rate was 0.33. We are now up to 0.38, but we're talking about cities like, our friends in Socorro, which we're friends now. We're not on opposing sides, but they're upwards of 0.7, 0.8 in their tax rates. And of course, during the pandemic, our city council chose not to raise taxes whatsoever. However, taxes are very complicated. So not raising your tax rate doesn't mean that the tax rate isn't going to go up. It's all dependent on what central appraisal does. And as we know, 2 years in a row, they just completed yet another appraisal in which people have received some pretty shocking values. So even cities that keep their tax rate at the same rate, it still could mean that your taxes would go up. But when you take a look, if we have constituents who are coming in claiming, my taxes, are going towards the city, how come my streets aren't improved? Our city staff will sit with them so that they truly understand their tax bill. And recently, it was relayed to me that this happened within the last couple weeks. A gentleman came in with taxes owed of about $3,000. And so our staff showed him who is getting what. And for the year, the city of San Elizario, of those taxes, was getting $90.
Yes, because most of the taxes go to the school district, and so I think we've touched upon a lot of issues, and I know right now a lot of people are looking to challenge their
Of course,
their
as they should.
appraisal, and I know I did it last year for our home, and I was successful, and this year, hopefully. Now that it's not COVID time, people can do it in person if they're not as tech savvy. I know I covered this with my students just last week because we were doing the chapter on the budgets, and I showed them where to go to the CAD. But interesting to see that, out of the 3,000, a whole $90 was going to the city of San Elizario. So yes, so half of your money, or more than half, goes to the school district. And then EPCC, we do get some, UMC, the county.
There are several, yes, of course.
So there's lots of entities. So we're getting close to the end of time, and I don't know if there's something that you want to touch upon that we didn't even discuss that you were one of the first elected officials there.
Correct, yes. So after the incorporation, I was elected the first mayor during this time. Everyone's like, oh, you were the first mayor. Well, at least in the 2000s, in the 1800s and 1900s, there were other mayors. But yes, I was mayor for the first 4 years, and then I transitioned into the role of city administrator. So, even though we incorporated in 2013, we were not allowed to vote in city council until 2014. And it truly wasn't until 2015 that we started acquiring staff, our city marshal, our public works director, code enforcement, all of that. And so really it's been since 2015 that we've been working. And to be honest with you, it is a challenge. Just like in everything, you hear about the 7-year itch. We no longer have the grace of people's understanding that, oh, well, they're a new city. We've been around long enough where people should be seeing things. And believe me, I'm a resident in San Elizario. I feel exactly the same way. So those of us who are on staff now, we are really, really making an effort to get over that hump. It was at first laying a foundation. Now we need those people to actually put things into work. And so, again, like I said, we're getting that transportation study off the ground, and we're going to start making those changes in the community that people want to see.
Thank you, Ms. Sanchez. Thank you for your time. Our guest has been Maya Sanchez, City Manager of the City of San Elizario. And I'm Dr. Sylvia Peregrino. This is Entre Nosotras, Latina Voices, and I hope that you've gotten a good introduction on what a long process it is to reincorporate and or to become a city. Thank you, and we'll continue this conversation.
Thank you for having me.